All right, thanks for joining us for episode 3 of the BIMI Group's educational series. Today, we are going to be talking about email service providers and their role in helping brands adopt BIMI and what ESPs may need to consider when they're looking forward to supporting the standard and working with their clients. I have with me today Len Shneyder, VP of Industry Relations at Twilio and a member of the BIMI Working Group. I'm your host, Matthew Vernhout. I'm the VP of Deliverability with Netcore and the Communications Chair for the BIMI Working Group. Len, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're going to just dive right in, Len. I want to hear in your own words what BIMI means to marketers and the types of things that you're hearing from your clients.
Yeah, I think BIMI represents the next and greatest evolution of the user experience for email. It's an opportunity for marketers to further brand the email experience for consumers and to help them make decisions about what they want to open and what they don't, because they'll see recognizable logos in the inbox, which, if we think of ourselves as a graphically oriented society, the more pictures, the better.
That's a great way to explain it. I think, as people recognize brands over maybe domains or recognize brands over even names of things, I think that'll certainly help with some of those recognition issues. I think there are a number of things that marketers and brands need to do in order to adopt BIMI and get BIMI working for their organizations. When they're working with their email platform and their email vendors, what types of things, do you expect them to come up against? What types of things do you think they need to sort of resolve in order to get there and to get BIMI working for them?
Yeah, I think we have to think about BIMI as essentially an incentive to do the things that they're already supposed to be doing. So as you and I know, email authentication has been around for a long time, and we were both in the email world when the first vestiges of it were being hammered out and everybody was, screaming about SPF, and then came DKIM, but before that we had domain keys and identified mail, so those standards got merged. So these things are not new, the requirements for BIMI. What BIMI is essentially a carrot to the senders of the world to say, hey, these things that have been around for well over a decade, we really want you to take advantage of them, because we want to actually get to a place in time where all legitimate mail is essentially authenticated and all illegitimate mail is unauthenticated. And then it becomes a lot easier to make the kinds of decisions about what's good versus bad, what goes to the inbox and what doesn't. So essentially, BIMI is really a carrot to the sending world to say, look, we understand email authentication is not the simplest thing in the world. It is complicated. It can be onerous. It does require technical expertise. But if you do it, you will get this neat thing, this payoff that essentially is a further extension of your brand in the inbox to your consumers.
Right. And I guess to that end, right, when I think about how, brands are implementing BIMI, typically it gets implemented at the organizational domain level. So,
yeah.
Domain.com. And a lot of ESPs ask their clients to use subdomain.com or subdomain.domain.com. Where do you see sort of that split in responsibility if, BIMI is actually being implemented outside the ESP's network, but, the idea is that mail being sent through that ESP is actually what's benefiting from the BIMI record. So where do you see sort of the organizational responsibility split or sort of the separation of, company versus marketing domain?
So the responsibility is no different than in any of the other kind of best practices and guidance responsibilities that fall into the shoulders of ESPs. People use ESPs because email is actually more complicated than they may understand at first. The complicated bit of email is email at scale, right? Like the analogy I use is sending one email, no problem. 10 emails, no problem. 100 emails gets a little tedious, typing in addresses, right? But once you go beyond kind of like the 3-digit mark, then you're actually into this realm of unknown unknowns. So you need an ESP to guide you and to give you the tools and platform in order to do it efficiently, and also to understand all of the various signals that are carried within the email transaction. So in this case, I look at it this way. The responsibility of ESPs within kind of like the authentication and BIMI world is essentially to guide our customers and help them make the right decisions. We help our customers set up SPF and DKIM, and we give them those tools to self-serve. And if they need more assistance, we have technical teams to do that. We don't expect our customers to be email experts. We expect them to know their businesses, and we help them with the email part. No differently, the role of the ESP is to help all the senders of the world take advantage of BIMI and thereby engage in good email authentication practices.
Right. No, that definitely makes sense. And I think, pushing those practices back up the chain to the organization as well is always an effort. I think, at least over the 20 years that I've been working as a deliverability privacy consultant, those efforts always push beyond just the marketing domains and try to get into sort of the organizational stuff. And then thinking, about those challenges that marketers face when it comes to implementing, SPF. Even you got to explain right from sometimes zero what is SPF and why it's important. What other additional challenges do you see that marketers face when it comes to now they want to implement BIMI, which is sort of like in the scale of things, sort of fourth in line, if you will?
Well, to a certain degree, we're going to have to give them tools, or at least someone's going to have to create tools, and there are a few out there to ensure that their logos look proper, right? Like at one time, we were thinking of how do we help people understand that email on mobile is going to look very different than email on a desktop, right? Because forget about even considering email on a laptop. We were still dealing with desktops back then. So similarly, when you deal with graphical elements and kind of their net effect in the inbox, those are some of the questions that are going to come up. Not only that, about the variations in processes to make sure that it aligns and has a similar effect. Because the one thing marketers are really concerned about is consistency. You need to make sure that your brand is consistent in every single inbox so that user experience is consistent. Because otherwise, you're going to get questions. You're going to generate uncertainty if you don't have that consistency. So in addition to that, I think there'll be questions around like what happens if a really sophisticated brand with a lot of sub-brands wants to do BIMI, right? How do you actually enable that, and what kind of changes at the organizational level do you have to make in terms of selectors? Because guess what? You could have a holding company mailing on behalf of a dozen brands or more, and each of those has its own logo. That becomes complicated.
Right. Yeah. And beyond that, even, talking about, managing your own brand and your own logo, there are some key differences even in how the different platforms right now that we've experienced with displaying BIMI are actually showing those icons.
Yep. And not to even mention dark mode, right? Like, let's not even open that Pandora's box.
Right. Yeah. Right. I think originally looking back, a year ago, the BIMI group, we talked a lot about, transparent logos are the way to go. And then we started to look at dark mode come out and we were like, wait, that doesn't work. Change your logos again.
Okay, everybody with a dark logo, create a light logo version just for dark mode, right? So right. Yeah, we're dealing with a really fractured landscape, and this is kind of like a really good effort to try to create a unified way of displaying logos in the inbox, right? However, as we know, the inbox is not necessarily attached to the OS, which is not necessarily attached to the device, which is not necessarily attached to the mobile phone. And so there are all kinds of nuances and variations to work through. And that's why I say, like, at some point we're going to have to think of some really cool tools. And this may be an ESP effort or a third-party effort, the way, boutique deliverability services providers cater to the email industry and give them tools and capabilities beyond what just ESPs provide to their customers. Like, we need eventually a set of tools to make this as easy and frictionless a path forward that gives marketers and brands the ability to understand what kind of experience they are now curating or helping to curate for their subscribers and email consumers.
Absolutely. And to that end, I would, reference back to episode 2, where Trent and I discussed the tools that the BIMI group has made available around developing your logo, implementing extensions so that you can export in the proper format from the different design platforms where you're designing your logo to make sure that they're as close to the specifications as possible. So definitely go back and watch that. Check out the BIMI Group website for links to those tools. They're all available open source, and they should plug directly into whether it's your Mac or PC version of Photoshop to export the photos properly and then format the SVG files so that they have the greatest chance of success. One of the things you also talked about, Len, is just sort of the idea of, the different platforms, and, we obviously can't control all of the different things. Can you talk a little bit about some of the differences you've experienced or your clients have experienced, even with the Yahoo implementation compared to, say, the Gmail implementation or the pilot that's happening as of this time?
Yeah, so there are differences in the way you would implement BIMI, and Google is enlisted third parties currently in their BIMI process in obtaining what's called a verified mark certificate. So there are market differences in process in order to get BIMI going, but again, because it's the pilot, I don't want to speak in very definite terms around what the future will hold when BIMI is GA at Google. But we know that there are going to be differences in the way that individual mailbox providers want to support BIMI. But I think the more exciting thing to focus on is the fact that we're really looking at international excitement and support for the standard. And that's just evident in the kinds of organizations that are joining the Authenticators Working Group and that are looking to essentially be part of that next generation of inbox experiences through BIMI.
Great. Thanks very much, Len. I think we're going to close out. I'm really excited that, ESPs are going to be involved, and they're really sort of thinking about, how do I support my clients in these efforts and the efforts that they need to go through, as well as how we've seen sort of, like you said, the community has sort of rallied behind, testing and piloting and trialing adoptions. Are there any closing thoughts that you would share for brands as they think about adoption of BIMI and sort of, maybe they can't get into the pilot today, but what, like you said, when we get to GA, what should they be doing to prepare, and what should maybe ESPs be doing to prepare for that day when GA is available, or wider adoption at other places around the world are available?
I think the most important thing for brands to realize is that BIMI will require a shift in their DMARC policies to move to P equals quarantine or reject or enforcement. And we know for a fact, based on research from companies like 250 OK and Valley Mail, that a great swath of the sending world is not at enforcement, and that represents a problem. So regardless whether or not you want to take advantage of BIMI, consider changing your DMARC policy to a reject policy, because right now it's not doing a heck of a lot for you if it's not at reject. We want it at a reject policy or a quarantine policy so that the receiving domains that are reading this policy know that if it doesn't actually pass the checks that it's supposed to, that mail gets dropped. You're actually doing your customers a service by switching to these more stringent policies versus letting them open. And that will be a requirement for BIMI. So I would say, do it now, get comfortable, align all of your domains now, so that when you can take advantage of Google and BIMI when it goes GA, you'll be ready for it. And right now, you can also take advantage of Yahoo's implementation. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing this.
Right. And from my past experience with helping brands get, into a quarantine or even into a reject policy, that's the hardest part of doing all of this, really, is
absolutely
finding all your mail, finding where it all sends from, finding who all your vendors are. And you're going to spend the majority of your time, if you're not already at a quarantine or a reject policy, doing that, I think. So that's some great advice. And, definitely if you're stuck, reach out to your ESP for help. And continue to check out our FAQs. We're updating them regularly on the BIMI group, and we are responding to questions should you have them. So please do check us out. Don't forget to like and share and comment on our videos. It's great so we know what other content to produce for you. Len, I just want to thank you again for joining us today, and stay tuned for our next episode.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And to everyone out there, stay safe and healthy. Take care.
Thank you.